gentlemen, welcome to Robben Island, Malaysia. It's reminded the color of your personal do with the back very. This remains edge. The waters come to a complete stop and wait for the local bus to do backing row by row. Enjoy yourself, Robben Island.
Very cool. Sorry, die zeekoe was er binnen.
Dat lijkt op de leopard. Nee. Is daar een leopardkolonie?
An hour late, and I was like, how inconvenient. Because she could have hired a helicopter to come here and let the business of the day run, but it would have saved everyone time. Well, in front is the apartheid prison. We had only black male prisoners incarcerated here during the apartheid era. Later on, we are going to have a 10-minute break, and you will see outside the bus here, there are photographic images of the first group to have arrived here in 1962. And according to the apartheid policy, there were only black men incarcerated on Robben Island, but we were also categorized on the basis of features, hair texture, etc. I would be categorized as an African. Those of mixed race were categorized as coloreds, and we also had Indian men on the island. The women were kept in different prisons around South Africa, and the white male political prisoners spent their time in Pretoria Central. But this was regarded as the hellhole of the apartheid regime in this country. Even this prison that we see in front here, the first group, they were kept in what they call the old tron. You will see the images outside. But they were the ones that were actually forced to build the maximum prison. And it is said to have been the most traumatic times to have been here. I mean, you can't imagine being forced to build your own prison. Pardon? No, you'll see the images outside this bus. It's towards that direction in the northwestern parts of the island. We're just giving him a lift, folks. It's very hot outside. So we also had criminals on Robben Island. They were all mixed together at first, but the guards noticed the political influence. So they had to separate criminals from political prisoners. So we'll get to show you where their prison is. Folks, where is everyone from? Mane, I know we have Ethiopians at the back, mighty Ethiopians. Welcome to South Africa. They are like blood brothers. You know, Mandela was trained in Ethiopia and became the first commander from the Ottawa Seaboard. On the right side, this is a graveyard where people that died of the leprosy disease were buried. And that was during the British colonial era in the 1800s. So between 1840 until 1931, it marks Robben Island as a leper colony. But it was to avoid the spread of the disease in South Africa as to why people that were diagnosed with it were banished to the island, as they had in many other countries. The stigma attached to the leprosy patients. Kilometers from Robben Island to Bloemfontein. But during apartheid, nobody managed to escape from Robben Island. And that was to do with security reasons and also the fear of great white sharks. And the distance as well, which was one of the major obstacles. And we are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Well, folks, we are now coming to the house of Robert Sobukwe, the leader of the Pan-African Congress. He was charged for his involvement in organizing the protest against the Dome Pass, but it resulted in the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, the 21st of March. So this is the house named in honor of Robert Sobukwe, and he was actually brought here after he served 3 years in Pretoria for his involvement in the protest. What the government did was to further introduce what they called the Robert Sobukwe's Clause, which meant that he was now sentenced to Robben Island without further trial for an indefinite period. But here he was on Robben Island for a duration of 6 years. It is said that he was also diagnosed with cancer, according to medical reports. That's how the government decided then to transfer him to Kimberley, where he further continued the sentence under house arrest. And that is where this leader died as a political prisoner 9 years later. They said he died of cancer, but it is believed that he was poisoned by the government. But on Robben Island, we have never had anyone else incarcerated in this house after he had left. And next to the house are kennels that were built for dogs. And that was after the Soweto uprising in 1976. The dogs were all part of added security for the guards here. Because after, the Soweto outbreak led to many of the activists being arrested, mostly the students. And it's at a time we had a greater influx of prisoners that came to the island. So the authorities decided that dogs must be introduced here to avoid anyone from escaping from Robben Island. So folks, you will see a photograph of Robert Sobukwe on the side here, on the right, in one of the sessions with the members of parliament, because they were the ones who on occasion came here to question him about the liberation movement, but also of their concern of the future of South Africa. This was a professor from Wits University. He was a learned man, very humble, but he spoke his mind and he was fearless of the government. It's just that they disagreed with his policies at the time. But they knew that he spoke sense, because our leaders were for an inclusive government, that Africans must not be left out in the affairs of this country and to be even exploited by the minority. But, citizens in Europe disagreed with the apartheid regime in South Africa, and there were individuals that worked tirelessly to make sure that their voices were heard, because the economic sanctions, the boycotts and all activities that happened put pressure on their governments to voice their concerns about the regime in this country. It took a long time, even as university students, but in the end we got the results, because we would not be where we are today talking of this history if it wasn't for the masses out there. On the right side is the church that was built for the leprosy patients, and it's now a church under the authority of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. So on occasion they come to the island to have services there. We also have another church in the village, and that was for the medical staff. But that church is now used by the residents. We have about 200 people living there. But it's also open to the public, but only on Valentine's Day. So if you'd like to get married on Robben Island, we still have room for tomorrow. In case you want to surprise somebody, we will all bear witness. You can actually come. We had 21 couples that got married on Robben Island before lockdown. So it's been closed ever since. It's now only reopening. And this is where they kept the criminals. So to avoid political influence. And the criminals were also classified as blackmail prisoners. In 1996, when Robben Island closed as a prison, the criminals were amongst the last prisoners to have left Robben Island. Because our leaders, they took a collective decision that Robben Island must now reopen as an institution of learning. And this is now within this new political dispensation. So it reopened in 1997. And we have had people from all walks of life here with a common interest to learn what happened in South Africa. But also to learn more about themselves as well. Because we are learning as much as you are learning. But the message has been clear from our leaders. No to racism and discrimination in society. And wherever we see that happen, we should voice ourselves and we should act on it. Yeah, those idiots must not be given space to breathe. This is the village where the guards lived during the apartheid era. But now you only live on Robben Island on the basis of you being employed here. My colleague lives here, but I live in one of the townships on the mainland. But it's a choice if you are employed whether you want to stay on the island or not. I've stayed before because I was quite intrigued in learning of the fact that former prisoners and guards came back to reopen Robben Island as a museum. I wanted to more understand the relationship, how they were established and how they were still continuing. And there's no animosity. And that is a humbling experience. It's very hot today. So folks, on the right side is the church open on Valentine's Day. And you know marriage is viewed as a life sentence on Robben Island. So if you get married here, no divorce. Those are the conditions. This is Rome. We had a primary school, but it closed at the end of 2011. So it now means that we have a staff board. It takes the kids and the families who work on the other side. And late afternoon, it comes back as well. We have a supermarket as well for daily groceries. But they are also going to reopen some of these houses as guest houses in the near future. So for those who would like to spend a night or a few days, you'll be more than welcome to do so. This used to be the primary school on the right side. The origins of the building, it was a hospital ward. At the time, the leprosy patients were on the island. So no property is for sale here, because this is now also a UNESCO site. And on our right side, you'll see the lighthouse. Below is a graveyard, which they call the Irish graveyard, because majority of the staff members came from Ireland during the leprosy period. The missionaries, the nuns, nurses, etc. So they were buried separately from the patients at the time. Well, folks, I was fortunate to have met Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. I met him on 3 occasions. But the first time is when we had an Irish delegation here. It was early 2000. The concept of the visit was based on reconciliation in South Africa and possible ways as to how that could be approached in Ireland. So they had the 2 opposition parties that they had invited. So that's how I got to learn of their connection with South Africa as well. And also of their involvement in our struggle in fighting against apartheid. Especially one of the highlights in Dublin of the dump store workers that refused to sell South African goods over the counter. And they were all fired. And it resulted in Dublin coming to a standstill. Because many people were not aware, but that breaking as news, it led to a lot of people quite furious in learning that there was racism in South Africa. Because the Irish also relate that they experienced the same in England in the 60s. No dogs, no Irish, no blacks on the bus. So wow, I never knew that actually happened. But it's history. The good thing about the historians, they write all of this documented as evidence. So folks, we're going to have a 10-minute break. We have a canteen if you'd like to buy some refreshments. There are also toilet facilities. When the Dutch colonized South Africa in the mid-1600s, the first captives were sent to the Van Riebeeck quarry. But later on, we are also going to see the Limestone quarry, where Nelson Mandela and the leaders labored during the apartheid era. But South Africa, the Portuguese were here in the 1400s, in the late 1400s. But they never managed to colonize South Africa. They were defeated, but they made their next move to Angola and to Mozambique. That is where they colonized. And later, the British came to South Africa in the late 1700s. Yeah, this was a key location for far distant travelers. So, in the era of the Portuguese and Dutch, it is documented that there were more than 2,000 ships that came to refresh in South Africa. But the Dutchmen that arrived in the mid-1600s, they never saw it coming, the Quakers. And that fight, it was a disaster for a lot of chiefs that were here at that time, because I mean, a lot of produce came from this place. The Quakers were merchants, and they were actually wealthy at the time, because for ships to actually trade, they needed a lot of meat, a lot of produce, and they had to, render their services. Well, if you look at the image of the mountain from this view, the mountain looks like a sleeping giant. You can see the head and nose where you see the cloud, that's the face. The tabletop is the chest and the rest of the body. You can see the flat stomach all the way. But you have to use your imagination. And we are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. On the other side of the mountain is the Indian Ocean. So Cape Town, it is said to be the #1 tourist destination in the whole world. It's the people's choice according to global traffics. At one time it was Paris, it was St. Petersburg, Russia, it was New York, but now the spotlight is in Africa. And Cape Town is in the southern tip where the 2 oceans meet, the Atlantic and Indian Ocean. So this is actually the best time to be in the mother city, in the summer season. And we might get to see some antelopes as we continue our journey here. There are springboks, Steenboks and Waterboks, and the European fellow deers that were introduced here. But this was for the guards as part of their hunting and recreation activities. How big is the island? Well, it's about 574 hectares. So it's about 11 kilometers by foot. But you know, the prisoners, they were quite restricted. Those that built the roads on Robben Island had an idea of how the island looked like. But others were sent to their designated areas and back. Oh, these lovebirds. We had South African and soldiers from Great Britain that were stationed here because the Germans were stationed in Namibia. So there were speculations that they would have attacked. But fortunately, nothing happened here. So these guns were only tested during the war. So it's only in North Africa where the war happened. I'm again going to make reference to Ethiopia because I learned something interesting, that the first gunshots of the war were fired in the African continent when the Italians tried to invade Ethiopia. And their cry was ignored in the African League of Nations. But they only occupied Ethiopia for 5 years. So this is one country that was never colonized in the African continent.
Yes.
It was seen as the beacon of light in Africa. So on the right side is our lighthouse, built in 1865. But it still does function as the museum's lighthouse. And we also have a desalination plant on the island. That is now for the water supply. And they've introduced solar panels. There are pros and cons of living here. Further left you can see there are other guns. Oh, here's a Steenbok on the left side, just behind this big bush here. A Steenbok. There's a small brown antelope. If you see the big bush, look further left side, there's brown over there. It's like the size of a dog. A Steenbok. Yeah, it's like a small deer. Yes, folks, if you haven't been on safari, this could be a marvelous introduction. Yeah, it's one of the small guys. And we had a golf course on Robben Island as well. Yeah, the golf course is where the guards played. And it was abandoned in 1996 when Robben Island closed as a prison. But this is where the ministers would come play, and some of the officers and guards as well. So it used to be a 9-hole golf course. But I hear there are plans that it's going to be revamped. These are branches from the top tree. And we are back in the village. The village is a very quiet neighborhood. Most people are still in their workstations. So it's only late afternoon and sometimes weekends that you'd find a slight buzz going on. But what is amazing to me is the guards have mutual respect with the former prisoners. There's mutual respect between the citizens that live here and that have this terrible past. And it's an extraordinary experience, that is lived by ordinary people. And there is so much that we can learn from them. And it's not so long ago since we've had apartheid abolished. Next year we will be celebrating 30 years. But that does not mean that there is no more racism in South Africa. There are still big problems in this country, especially when it comes to economic disparities and just the whole social construct. And 30 years is a very short time for us to have achieved what is said. But it's all work in progress. It's just disheartening. He was transferred to Baltimore, where he continued for 7 years, and the last 2 years he served under house arrest in what is called Victor Verster prison. The past Saturday, we were celebrating 33 years. There was a memorial lecture on his behalf at the Ezekiel Museum in town. In 1991, all other political prisoners were then released. The women, including the white male political prisoners that were in Pretoria. And the first time that they all came back to Robben Island was when the first historic reunion was hosted here in 1995, the year after apartheid abolished. In the quarry, you'll get to see the pile of stones, which is a national monument of remembrance. It is a representation of all the prisoners that came back on reunion day. After the ceremony that was held here, everybody had to place a stone on top of each other to have marked that day in history when they all came back. And that was the only historic reunion that was ever held here. In 2018, when we were celebrating Nelson Mandela's 100 years, in celebration, the Reserve Bank encrypted that pile of stones in the back of the 100 Rand note in South Africa. All our currency has the big 5 animals. The 100 Rand note, the original 100 Rand note, has the buffalo on it. But in 2018, it had that special edition with that pile of stones encrypted. The cave at the bottom, it was used as their toilet if they needed to relieve themselves. We had 31 prisoners that worked in this area, and they had to work for about 9 hours each day, but they had to share the same bucket. And on top is a guard tower, so you are not allowed to leave the area during work hours here. And limestone was only used on Robben Island for road constructions, so this was all part of their punishments, let alone the fact that limestone is also health hazardous, because a lot of the prisoners, when they left Robben Island, some had respiratory problems, others had eyesight problems as well. I mean, there were other prominent leaders we had in South Africa that were actually kept here as well. Some had even spent a longer period than Nelson Mandela. Because even the minister that was here today, she is the daughter of Walter Sisulu, who was one of the Rivonia tribe, co-accused with Nelson Mandela. And Walter Sisulu spent 26 years on Robben Island. So he was released in 1989. So folks, this road, as it further continues, if you look on your left side, these are the origins of the roads in terms of how limestone was used here. So the guards meant business. They were to break the prisoners by any means necessary, but they were never able to conquer, because we learned that no one committed suicide on Robben Island. It was not an option if you were held here as a prisoner. As much as you were daily reminded that you would never experience freedom. Prisoners, who is going to share with you his journey. Since 1997, the island reopened, and this is one of the very few places in the world that you would get to meet survivors that get to share their experiences and who are still dealing with the apartheid trauma in different levels. And in front we have a karamat, the shrine. It was built in honor of the Indonesian sheikh, Haji Mataram. He is said to have written the Quran out of memory when he was exiled to South Africa as a political prisoner by the Dutch. He was from Indonesia, the Prince of Madura. He died on the island, was buried here in 1754, but this structure was built in honor of him during the apartheid era, because the Muslim prisoners, they were able to identify his tombstone. So they proposed to the authorities that they build the karamat. So they were allowed because the authorities hoped that it would have created division. But that failed because there was more understanding and tolerance between the political prisoners here. So if you'd like to visit the shrine after the tour in the prison, you are welcome to do so, just to see the tombstone and the exhibition that we have inside there.
It's a sleepover. Just one night.
Freue ich mich auch immer.
Welcome to Robben Island, maximum security prison. This prison has been a national museum, and that dates back to January of 1997. And as a prison, it was used to imprison male political prisoners, black, colored, Indian, between 1962 and 1991, and I'm one of those. I spent 7 years in this prison. From 84 to 91, my prison number recorded on my arrival here, 3884, 38/84. The number means I was the 38th prisoner to arrive here in 1984. And I did not come alone. I came here with 4 other guys. We were all co-accused, and all 5 of us came from the same political formation, African National Congress. I joined that organization in 1979 when I left this country to live in exile because of political persecution and police harassment. For me, exile is 3 countries in the following order: Tanzania, Angola, and the last country being Zambia before my arrest. My names, folks, are Khotso Glenn Nswelengwe, originally from Soweto. Grew up in Soweto, started politics in Soweto as a student and youth activist, and of course until I left the country in '79. Now, I'm going to tell you all about that. I'm going to tell you about prison, take you through some of the buildings here. As we do all that, you are more than welcome to make or take pictures, ask me any questions, and I'll do my best, to engage with you as we go along. I've been doing this now, folks. September this year will be 20 years exactly. I started to give my very first prison tour here September of 2003. Now, my sentence, by the way, was 25 years, even though I said I was here for 7 years. So I left prison like everybody else because Nelson Mandela and Abraham Hitler had reached an agreement on releasing political prisoners unconditionally, including Mandela himself, and an expungement of our records. So those 2 things, they did come to pass. Now, as I was going about my life in Soweto and thinking about almost everything, and then a thought comes to me and say, hey, Khotso, what if one day somebody comes for you and say, hey, you never finish your sentence? Instead of leaving prison in 2009, you leave in 1991. So I came back. And so if you check the 20 years I've been doing this tours, plus the 7 years I've been a prisoner here, 25 years is done. I actually gave them an extra bonus of 2 years now. So I can't be accused of never finishing my sentence. And I now live in a township, Kailicha is about 35 kilometers from Cape Town. It's on the N2 freeway. On your way to Somerset, you pass Kailicha. You can't miss it, you know. All the shacks can be visible from the freeway. That's where I live now, and I commute to come here. They did offer me to live in the village. Remember, the village is where my jailer was once staying there as a resident. And so I thought, nah, man. I can't come here every day, be here, do this, and still stay on this island. I need to leave the island, you know, and come back. The beginning was the most difficult in terms of emotions and psychological issues. And that's when I realized also that I needed help, you know, in terms of people who are professional in making you adjust to this new reality that I put myself through. So I've been going through counseling. Now you're the okay. I'm recruiting you. I'm happy that they never did any bad to you. Yeah. Because revenge brings more revenge. Yeah. Starting rows on the side. My team will take you. And then it's only Sunday where we never allow outside. That's the only day.
Sorry.
Oh, no, the big one. I was never in, you know me, I'm an extrovert, you know. I think it was crazy for us to be the same, you know. Okay, guys. Well, in the absence of any questions, this is where I get to say my goodbyes. Let me take this opportunity to thank you, ladies and gents, for taking time out this afternoon.